Today, a federal judge giving Donald Trump the first major setback of his new administration, just 4 days in, delivering a legal body blow to Trump's plan to fundamentally reshape the U.S. Constitution by ending birthright citizenship. A judge appointed by Ronald Reagan issuing a temporary restraining order blocking Trump's executive order, condemning the EO itself by saying this, quote, "I have been on the bench for more than 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order. Frankly, I have difficulty understanding how a member of the bar could state unequivocally that this is a constitutional order. It just boggles my mind," thwarting Trump's key campaign promise in just 25 minutes. In the hearing, a lawyer for 4 of the states suing highlighted the cruelty of the policy, noting that without birthright citizenship, quote, "children being born might have no legal status, might be subject to deportation, stateless, subject to travel restrictions, deprived of their right to vote as they age, deprived of their right to work legally, and deprived of their vote to participate in our democratic system. These individuals will lose their right to be full participants in our society as a new permanent underclass in the country." The order is now blocked for 14 days, pending further briefing to make that order permanent. In a statement, the Attorney General for Arizona, one of the 4 states seeking to block the order, said this, quote, "Today's ruling is a win for the rule of law and the U.S. Constitution. No president can change the Constitution on a whim, and today's decision affirms that." Trump's DOJ vowing to fight on, saying they will vigorously defend their executive order. The case is almost certain to be appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and it remains to be seen how Trump's handpicked justices will rule. This major stumbling block and rebuke to one of Trump's key campaign promises is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. MSNBC legal analyst and NYU law professor Melissa Murray's here. With me here at the table, Alicia Menendez, co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, and former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly's back. Melissa Murray, on the law, this seems black and white. How did we get here?
It's unclear how we got here. We definitely didn't get here by reading the Constitution, because if we had read the Constitution, we would have seen very clearly that it states unequivocally that those individuals who are born in or naturalized in the United States and are subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they are born. That's the text of the constitutional amendment. The 14th Amendment was passed in the wake of the American Civil War for the purpose of repudiating Dred Scott versus Sanford, which said that African Americans could not be citizens ever because they were descended from African slaves. It was a rebuke to that hierarchy of racial supremacy, and it has been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly throughout our history. Nothing could be more plain. The conservatives are arguing that the question of whether children born to undocumented persons or those who are here temporarily on visas, or whether they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, makes this a more open question. That is not the case. And the judge probed that today, asking if they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, does that mean we cannot prosecute them when they break laws? And the lawyers were flummoxed. Of course you could prosecute them because they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in all purposes. So this seems very open and shut, but of course it is on its way to the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the asterisk I'd put into all of the clarity that this Ronald Reagan appointed judge offered today is that some of this analysis was also provided around absolute immunity. And I wonder if you can pull the thread forward. What will be argued in front of the Supreme Court?
Well, there's going to be a broad argument that the president has these implied or inferred powers that allow him to take steps to regulate either emergency situations or major situations like immigration, where executive power is perhaps at its peak. But again, the president himself cannot amend the Constitution sua sponte or by executive order. There is a process laid out in Article 5 of the Constitution that makes very clear how you go about amending the Constitution. This is part of the Constitution, the provisions for birthright citizenship. If you want to change it, then you have to go through the process of amending the Constitution, going to Congress, or alternatively going to the state legislatures and making your case there. You cannot simply put this out, no matter how broad the implied or implicit powers of the president are. They don't go this far. And I'll be clear, I'm not sure that you're going to get a unanimous decision at the United States Supreme Court. You should, by all accounts. But there may be a couple of justices here who are willing to buy onto this cockamamie theory, but I don't see this surviving here. But again, the goal here is to flood the zone, make people scared, divert resources from other things.
There is a success story in Trump's, in any telling of the moving of the Overton window, right?
Yeah, that's right.
This was too crazy to do in Trump 1.0. This now has the support of, I think, about a third of the American people when it's polled. So in some ways, a legal defeat may be a price he's willing to pay for changing people's minds.
Yeah, I think measuring support of Donald Trump's immigration agenda is interesting because a lot of it in how it's framed and sometimes how Donald Trump lies about it. Donald Trump on Inauguration Day said we're the only country. We're not the only country. There's over, I believe, 30 nations that allow birthright citizenship. So one right there, if you tell the American people we're the only country, well, now people feel a little reflexive about it. But I think what's fascinating is on some simple immigration enforcement matters, Donald Trump and Republicans actually are well over 50%. If you take the Laken Riley Act, that's an example of someone who, if there is an undocumented person who is detained for a crime, now ripe for abuse, some Democrats have pointed that out, but the American people support detaining that person, even having a hearing for deportation. But if you move to, we are going to rescind the Biden rules that now allow ICE to go into churches and schools and rip a sixth-grade girl away from her dad, and now they're separated and neither one of them know what their future holds. Or the president's going to violate the 14th Amendment with a stroke of a pen and try to overturn what is a basic right that we give to people born here on U.S. soil. I think that's where the American people say, well, hold on just a minute. And it's fascinating the way you frame the question because Donald Trump is moving the debate in a direction, but he doesn't have to. He's actually getting in his own way and in the way of Capitol Hill Republicans because he's unhinged, he's untamed and unwell. And I think many Americans, I think millions of Americans, still consider him a danger to the country. We saw it in exciting the rally in J6 when he was in office. We saw it with the abuse of classified documents when he was out of office. We saw it with his violation of the 14th Amendment yesterday. And he is on a wretched grievance campaign. But what fundamentally this reveals is the very dark nature of the anti-immigrant campaign and platform of the Republican Party. He's doing this because this is where the heart of the Republican Party is, and it's a pretty ugly heart.
The other thing that's interesting, Melissa, is he's turning the judges who simply stare at facts, precedent, and the Constitution into subversive actors. I mean, this is a judge appointed by a conservative Republican. I'm sure Trump will have something nasty to tweet about him later in the day. And the idea that a strict interpretation of the letter of the Constitution is something that's going to be fodder in our politics is a sick mile marker in our dissent.
Well, that's certainly the case, Nicole, and I think it's only exacerbated by what we've seen over the last 3 days. And the fact that we saw the January 6th protesters, rioters, pardoned suggests that if you are there defending Donald Trump, no matter what you do, even if it contains elements of stochastic violence, you will be excused. You will be pardoned. There's someone who is going to be looking out for you, and that person sits in the Oval Office. We've already seen that there's a real fear among some members of the judiciary. Esther Salas, a judge in New Jersey, saw her husband and her son attacked. Her son was killed by someone who was actually looking for her and who also had documents with a dossier for Justice Sotomayor with him at the time. So the threat against judges just doing their level best, as John Roberts has once said, is real, and it has been amplified because of the things we have seen just over the course of the last 3 days.
I mean, in some ways, it becomes the only friction point left, right? Republicans in the Senate making abundantly clear that they are truth and fact immune, smearing and lying about the witnesses and folks offering testimony about Pete Hegseth's qualifications and others. You've got a lot of people being threatened in real time in the Fourth Estate, in the media. You've got Democrats sort of regrouping after November. And I think if you try to sort of pull the Trump story forward, I wonder if this wasn't some sort of temperature taking on how much strength and how much adherence to the rule of law exists on the bench.
Well, while he's doing his temperature taking, there are moms and dads across this country who are excited and ready to welcome their first baby. And they are thinking about all those things that moms and dads think about when you head to the hospital. Am I going to be okay? Are they going to be okay? How much are they going to weigh? 10 fingers, 10 toes, all those things. And now you have parents, whether they are here on visas or whether they are undocumented themselves, who now have to worry that they're going to fall into some strange legal gap. And there are ways in which states can make this either easier or harder for them, can offer protections. There was a law back in 2015 where if you lived in the state of Texas and you wanted to get a certified birth certificate from the state, you had to provide documentation that undocumented people in the state of Texas wouldn't have. So some of those folks sued the State Department of Health to say this is outrageous because you're de facto ending birthright citizenship in the state of Texas. If my kid doesn't have a certified birth certificate, then they can't go to school, then they can't get health care, then they don't have the right to vote. And so
can't get a passport.
This is not the first time we've litigated this. And I think part of the question becomes, has Donald Trump opened the door to other actors who want to act in the model of Stephen Miller? I think Stephen Miller was the only piece that was missing from the answer to your question about why he's doing this, because Stephen Miller's driving the bus here. And he will not stop until he has fundamentally changed the nature of this country, which is ironic to me, because the argument that Stephen Miller makes and that Donald Trump makes as a proxy is that immigrants are changing the very fabric of this country. In reality, it is Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, through actions like challenging the 14th Amendment, challenging our Constitution, that are in fact changing the fabric of this country.